Hey everyone, how's it going? Just wanted to do a short little video here on a topic that's come up in my mind lately, especially as I've been doing more of the Liturgy of the Hours, which is basically um, what is the proper emotional or affective disposition we're supposed to have as Christians toward the commandments or the moral law of God? And how can this impact our spiritual progress? Now, I'm not pretending to speak as though I've mastered what that proper disposition is in my own life. I'm just speaking to an issue that I think impacts all of us from time to time. And it is something that is a little bit overlooked, but is nevertheless something that I think we see, especially among young Catholic converts, young people in general, young Catholics, not just converts, but just young Catholics, Christians, generally speaking. Now, before we go on to the actual topic, if you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up. You can leave a comment, let me know what you think. It helps the channel grow. And if you want to support what I do, support the work that I do, consider becoming a patron. And you can find information about that in the description of this video. Also subscribe and hit the bell to get a notification when I go live or upload, so that you can be always aware of when I do things on this channel. So now on to the topic here. Well, I think sometimes in the spiritual life and the spiritual sojourn, perhaps unknowingly, we tend to fall into this spiritual dead end. And of course, I'm not excluding myself in this, where, we can, on the one hand, acknowledge the goodness of God and the love that we have to have for Him or cultivate for Him. And yet when it comes to His commandments in the moral order, we more or less see these as arbitrary sets of behavioral restrictions to begrudgingly put up with, so that we can retain our congruence with the life of grace in the soul. And you see often the effects of this in how even some Catholics talk when it comes to the moral order, especially among the young, I think. How many times have you heard somebody say something like, oh, if this wasn't a sin, I would do this, that, and the other thing, or I would if I could, or things like that, or just speak of sin, like when they speak of it abstractly, as if, they don't actually hate the sinfulness of the action. And this often can flow into our more lighthearted, humorous conversations, things like that. So why do I call this a spiritual dead end? Well, essentially, it's a way of having your cake and eating it too. On the one hand, we want union with God. We want to love God and to be loved by Him for the rest of eternity. In a word, we want heaven, the beatific vision. And yet, on the other hand, we see obedience to the commandments of God as just one necessary way to get there. And for that reason, we tend to approach God Himself and His commandments from two very different psychological vantage points. And as I said, this really is just a way of having your cake and eating it, because what we fail to realize is that God and the commandments of God, while they can be considered distinct in some key respects, nevertheless, in one respect, really aren't so fundamentally distinct from each other after all. And that's because the commandments of God, the moral law of God, these aren't just arbitrary decrees imposed upon humanity. They don't proceed from any kind of caprice on the part of the divine will. As St. Thomas Aquinas says, the natural law, the law inscribed on the hearts of men by God, is the rational creature's participation in the eternal law. And the eternal law is none other than God Himself, the divine essence, as turned towards creation. It is the divine wisdom through whom the whole order of creation was fashioned. It's what St. Maximus the Confessor called, the thought wheels of the one logos, the logoi, which is the logos as turned toward creation in his self-communicative love, resulting in the procession of creatures from God. And each creature, by virtue of this divine self-communication that we call the act of creation, each creature bears a certain similitude or likeness to the divine logos that fashioned it. And this is what we call its nature or form, that similitude or likeness to the divine logos. And it is this form that reflects the divine idea present in the divine logos. And it is this form which constitutes, therefore, the basis for what God determines prescriptively what that creature's perfection is going to consist in. And now when it comes to rational creatures, us, that very same basis for creaturely perfection, generally speaking, takes upon itself an added layer of moral status. And so morality on this view is nothing other than a rational creature's obligation to direct his will to the prescriptive and perfective ends of his nature as fashioned in the divine logos. And so in this sense, the tree, the rock, the human person, and the angel all participate in this same pattern of divine order. Each is called by God to fulfill the perfective demands of their nature, and in so doing attain some share in the divine goodness himself. And again, as St. Thomas Aquinas says in the first part of the Summa, quote, "In desiring their perfection, all things implicitly desire God," unquote. And so when we consider the moral law imposed on us by God, already we should avoid viewing this in an overly anthropocentric light. The commandments of God that we receive from him are to our nature what the perfective ends of a tree or a rock or an animal are to their natures. And order among all of God's creation consists, as the medieval theologian Robert Grosseteste has said, in, quote, "the arrangement of graded elements in which each is given its due place," unquote. And so it's like a cosmic symphony, if you will. In the words of Grosseteste, scholar, one preeminent scholar that's written very, very eloquently and prolifically on the philosophy of Robert Grosseteste, James McAvoy, he says, quote, "The being and activity of each member of the ordered ensemble is apportioned in the measure of its own analogy, in the Dionysian sense. That is to say, according to the degree of receptivity allotted to it by its place within the entire system. Justice rules the whole, giving each thing its due. Both orders, the material, scarcely less than the spiritual, have a sacral character, deriving their form from divine decree, and being directed to God as their end," unquote. And so, for us, this is what the commandments of God are ultimately all about. Not arbitrary sets of behavior regulations, but our route to divine union, to deification. The commandments of God aren't just a route to perfection, fulfillment, or happiness. They really are our perfection, fulfillment, and happiness. They're not just a way to attain union with God. They are reflections in and of themselves of the divinity itself as participated in by our cooperation with the grace that he gives us to carry them out. And so if we're truly wanting to love God, we have to also love his commandments. We have to, in a way, delight in them. As the psalmist says over and over and over and over again. Again, as you read through the Liturgy of the Hours, as you pray them, you will find this theme again and again and again repeated. The psalmist says, quote, "Give me intelligence to understand thy law, and I will observe it with all my heart. Lead me on the path, for I delight therein." And then he says, "Like songs of joy are to me thy statutes in the place of my pilgrimage. The law of thy mouth is precious to me, more than gold and silver 1,000-fold." And that's just a couple examples. That's just a few examples of this theme that is repeated very, very often up and down the Psalms. You find it again and again and again. And why does he speak this way? Well, to the uninitiated, it sounds very bizarre. No one delights in laws, for example. No one delights in the tax code or rules of social etiquette or in any set of civil laws. But the law of the Lord is characteristically different. It's of an entirely different ontological category. The tax code is not convertible with my happiness. It may contribute to certain elements of my happiness, maybe, or it might not. I mean, usually, frankly, it doesn't, but I also don't expect it to, right? I mean, these are restrictions placed upon my behavior for the sake of certain extrinsic benefits, not even for myself, but for the wider society. And it's a trade-off in that way. But the law of the Lord is not like this. The moral law, the natural law, is not like this. The law of God, the law of the Lord, the moral law, it doesn't just contribute to my happiness. It is constitutive of my happiness. It is the manner in which I participate more fully and congruently in my last end, which is not merely to be in some sort of relation to God, but most fundamentally it is God, the inner life of the Blessed Trinity, as participated in me as a member of the incarnate Son of God. That's what this whole thing is about. And so what this means is that if there's a part of me, if there's a dimension to my spiritual disposition, and of course there is, as there is for everyone, right? If there is a part of me that looks upon certain elements of the natural moral law on what virtue consists in, if there's a part of me that looks on those things in some negative emotional light, if there's elements of what God has commanded me to do, us to do, that I just kind of put up with to avoid eternal separation from God, then this is in itself an obstacle truly loving God fully and without reserve, because the law is reflective of the very divine essence itself. It'd be like claiming to love your spouse but hating everything your spouse does and says, which is utterly contrary to the vocation of marriage, and it undermines the entire sacrament. God is his law, and his law is our blessedness because God is our blessedness. That's the syllogism, if you will. As Christ himself says, "You are my friend if you keep my commands." And he doesn't say this in a despotic way, but because he knows how reflective the commandments are of his divine nature and how convertible his divine nature and life is with our blessedness. And so if we're going to aspire to love God with our whole heart, mind, and soul, we should take time, especially in the season of Lent, to meditate on those commandments of God that we either find difficult to keep or have some emotional hang-up over, and truly learn to love them and to make our thoughts, words, and acts, and even humor align with what each of these commandments signify, which is obviously a lifetime of work in and of itself, but it is part of that inner purgation of the soul that we must all undergo if we want to see the face of God, right? These are the sort of venial attachments to sin that throughout the course of one's life we want to be rooting out, so that we have to spend less time in the hereafter to root those out, right? And so that's kind of what that's been on my mind for a little bit. Hope you found this reflection, these thoughts, whatever you want to call it, a little bit helpful. Maybe you're able to see the function and the role of the commandments of God in a new light, and if that's true, I've done my task here. And as always, like I said, if you like this video, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, comment, please. It does help grow the channel. Let me know what you think. Subscribe, hit the bell to get a notification when I go live or upload a video. And if you do want to support my work, help me to keep making content regularly. It's really awesome if you could become a patron of mine. There are 3 tiers. One's only at $2.99 just for support. If you want to do that, that'd be wonderful and helpful. And thanks to all of you who have supported me, who have followed my work and have participated in it, engaged with it. It means a lot to me. And God bless you.